owning your story is really for you first. It's really looking at the value in your life experiences and what you've gone through. And a lot of the time I see people sort of brush over that or think, well, it's nothing special. But of course it's special. You are the hero or the heroine in your own journey. And it's so powerful to really look at what is that journey that brought you here.
Welcome to The Way of the Muse, a podcast for women who want to create richness in every area of their lives, from business and career to lifestyle, relationships, family, purpose, and fulfillment. I'm Gigi Sage.
And I'm Makena Sage. We're a mother-daughter coaching team, and combined, we've spent over 4 decades helping people create their best and most fully expressed lives. If you're ready to step into your bigger dreams with ease, fun, and flow, you're in the right place. Let's get into the episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is Makena, and I am doing a solo episode for you today. And I do just want to say that it is gardening day. So Chloe, my dog, who is an adorable Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, thinks she is the guard dog of the home, and she is barking and barking at the gardener. So if you hear any of that going on in the background, it's just lifing, and we're just going to roll with it because we've got a great episode for you today on how to tell your story and own the journey that brought you here. So I just got off a call with our Wealthy World Changers Mastermind, and the women, we did a similar topic in that we took a certain frame on it that we're not necessarily going to go super deep into in the podcast today. But the overall idea of really reflecting on your journey, on your life story and what brought you here, I did want to carry over because it's so powerful. You know, it seems simple, but how often do you really stop to think about that, to think about the pivotal moments, the challenges you've gone through, the gifts that it's really brought, and how that ties into what you're doing today in some way or what you're here to share. So this kind of reflective process can be so impactful, and there's a lot of different ways that you can use it too. So if you're listening to this going, you know, sounds sort of interesting, but why is this worth my time? You might want to tell your story. If you're ever going to create a website for yourself, then maybe you're going to have an about page or a bio. Or if you have your own business and you're creating social media posts, then you might take different pieces of your story. You might not tell the whole thing in one go, but different aspects of your story. Or if you ever want to give a speech or write a book. And even some version of your story, a very light version, could be for meeting someone at a party or building a deeper connection with someone. And overall, I would say, again, it's very cathartic to go through this process for yourself. So I highly recommend, even if you're not sure if this is for you, that you listen in and see what you can take away from today and actually really try it on, apply it. Do some journaling around this, do some self-reflection around this. I think you'll be amazed at what you come out with. Something that I shared on our call this morning with the Wealthy World Changers is that this quote that I often say, which is, stories are the language of the soul. And I don't know if I heard that somewhere years ago. If I did, then I would love to give credit, but I cannot remember. But it's something I've been saying for years and years. And many of you know that my first career was actually as a direct response copywriter and marketing strategist. And so a lot of what I did was I was writing people's stories, or I was writing aspects of their stories into their marketing copy. And this was for New York Times bestselling authors and all kinds of people. And so I really got good at, I would say, kind of pulling the different pieces out and then knowing how to share them in such a way that they could really connect with, let's say, their ideal audience or reader or client. So you can use it this way, but you can also just use this again as a self-reflective process for yourself. Something that a lot of the women shared this morning is that when it came to kind of looking at the, what brought them to where they are today, maybe they had seen aspects of that, but tying it all together was really powerful. And the other aha that a lot of them shared was that oh, I'm still in this story. And what is the legacy I want to share, or the lessons I want to share, or the gifts I want to share as a result of what I've gone through? And that was kind of this open-ended question that many of them were reflecting on after the call today. So this is something I see people struggle with a lot, is how to share their story. They don't know, well, what parts of my story do I share? I've lived a long life, right? What do I leave out? And will people even be interested in what I have to share? And why should they care? So this episode is really to talk to you first about how to own your story, because that's really where it begins. So owning your story is really for you first. It's really looking at the value in your life experiences and what you've gone through. And a lot of the time I see people sort of brush over that or think, well, it's nothing special. But of course it's special. You are the hero or the heroine in your own journey. And it's so powerful to really look at what is that journey that brought you here. And again, own that there's power in that, and that you've gone through challenges, and you've laughed and you've loved and you've cried, and that's made you who you are today. So that's the first piece, is to really own it. And sometimes I hear people say something like, I haven't really done anything all that special. So if you feel that way at all, then I highly recommend you do this exercise I'm going to describe in just a moment. But even if you do own the value of your story to some degree, and you've done different exercises around this is going to help you go deeper. So one that I want to share is something that we call your origin story. And a lot of times, or you could call it your genesis story. When we talk about superheroes, they have a genesis story. It's like, how did they become the superhero that they are? I'm not really a comic book or a superhero fan necessarily, but we all know that kind of story arc of, okay, Spider-Man got bit by the spider and, whatever, and went through this whole thing to become Spider-Man and then go out and help save the world. So what is your version of that? So the exercise I want to share with you is a fun, creative exercise where you just look at your life thus far. And you could go all the way back to the beginning if you'd like. And maybe you take 5-year chunks of your life. So 0 to 5, and then 5 to 10, and then, whatever those time periods are. And you could do this on a big cardboard poster board, or you could do it on Post-it notes or on a piece of paper, but really jot down what were the key moments, the key events that happened. They could be positive, they could be challenging, in that period of time that made you who you are today. So this is a fun kind of creative exercise or approach to really reflect back and go all the way back through your life story, because there might be key things that you had forgotten. And think about, what were the turning points on your journey that something really shifted? What were the low points, the biggest challenges, or the high points? And most importantly, you want to think about, what were the lessons out of each challenge? So first, you might just look at the key events that happened, and the lows and the highs and the turning points. But then sort of extracting the gold is thinking about, what did you learn from those experiences? How did they change you? Because stories are the language of the soul, is really talking about how, through millennia, this is how we've passed down information, is through stories. This is how we've shared around the fire, so to speak. And so there's something where stories touch us in a really powerful way, and we learn through stories more than anything else. So if you went to a speech and somebody just lectured on a bunch of theory, how would that impact you? Versus if somebody really told a powerful story or multiple powerful stories. You walk away feeling touched in a different way, but you also remember in a different way what they shared. So you have this kind of process of reflecting back on all the key moments in your journey. And then you can really think, okay, if I were the hero or the heroine of my story and I were telling this story, how would I tell it? The hero's journey is, many of you might be familiar with, Joseph Campbell was the first one to really famously identify this. I'm sure maybe people were talking about some version of it before, but he wrote a book in 1949 called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And he was a mythologist who really looked at myths and great stories and legends that exist in every culture in the world. And he identified this story arc that wove through all of them. This kind of process of, the hero or the protagonist of the story feels the call to something more. And then they, refuse that call at first. And then they ultimately follow it and they cross over the threshold from the known world, the world that they know, into the world of the unknown. And this is where they face challenges and trials and obstacles. And those might be external, like dragons and goblins and demons, or they might be internal, their own inner world, their patterns, their whatever it is that comes up for them. So they face all these challenges, and then through the challenges, there's some sort of gift or gifts. And in the great stories, it's usually something, could be a physical object or metaphorical or energetic, emotional, but some sort of gift or gifts that they gain as a result. And I'm synthesizing here, I'm summarizing. I believe he identified something like 12 different steps in the hero's journey, but these can be kind of simplified down. But in short, they gain these gifts, they come back, they return home with these gifts, be a changed person. And so this is, again, when you're looking at your story, I believe that we go through at least one arc of this hero's journey in our lifetimes. Probably you could tell your story in that way, but also you could think about it as maybe you go through multiple smaller ones. So this is kind of a fun framework, but whether or not you really use that in depth, it's great to just look and see, again, what were the highs, the lows, the turning points, the lessons learned. And how did those lessons make you into who you are today? So this is a really powerful process. It's worth taking, an hour or two and diving into and thinking about if you were the hero, the heroine, the superhero in your story, then how would you tell it? Don't just tell it like, oh, and then we moved here, we did this, and da 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 da. That's not owning your story. It's really, wow, this is who this made me become. This is what it was all for. I see this kind of thread, and that's what usually happens is there's this golden thread woven through your journey. And you go, wow, maybe you knew that, and maybe you'd never really reflected on it in this way before. So depending on where you're going to share your story, you might go into different aspects. So when you do your whole origin genesis story, then there's going to be a lot there. And you're not necessarily going to tell that whole story in most places. But you can see all these different pivotal moments along the way. And let's say that you were creating social media copy, then you could dive into any of those key turning points or challenging times in your journey, or, really high points in your journey. And you could write a post about that or do a video about it and share. What did you learn? What changed for you? How did that make you into who you are today? What were you feeling at that time? And that's going to be relatable to someone. So, and either way, even if your audience, your ideal client doesn't directly relate, a lot of times your story is where your values got created, the things that are important to you. And if the people that you're speaking to have shared values with you, then they'll be captivated because they'll see, oh, this is why this matters to her. And it matters to me too. So that's just one example. You could take any of those key events or turning points and make it a social media post. Or you could shorten your story and kind of look at, a certain aspect of your story as it relates to what you do now. And maybe you use the hero's journey as kind of the story arc. That's what we did on the call today, is the women really dug deeper to see if we took this framework or a simplified framework of the hero's journey to tell a version of their stories, how would they do that? And it was so impactful for them to see, oh, there is this through line woven throughout my journey. And a lot of times something that would be so powerful to share, whether that's in a speech or your about page or wherever that is. So when it comes to actually taking this into something that you can share with others, well, first of all, before we go into that, I'm teaching a lot of theory right now. Why don't I tell you, I'm not going to go into my whole story, my whole hero's journey here, because I've told it a lot in previous episodes, but I will share a couple of high level points that might give you some context. So I could go all the way back to the beginning of being born into a family of coaches and personal development, being raised in that world. But most of the time when I tell my story, that's not where I begin. If I'm working on a book, which I am, then I'm going to go all the way to the beginning. But when I tell my story in, let's say, a speech or a podcast episode or something like that, typically I'm going to go back to this moment that Joseph Campbell would call the call, which is, when did you feel the call to something more, to something different? And for me, the call really came through challenge. So when I was in my late 20s, I'm running my marketing business, I'm successful on paper, and things are going great living in California. And I started having daily panic attacks. And so I'd spend several minutes every day, at least, thinking that I was dying. And just really like the walls were closing in. I couldn't catch my breath. Thoughts looping around and around and around. And it felt like I was trapped. I could not get, out of these panic attacks and this pattern. And I was scared out of my mind, thought something was seriously wrong with me. And so this went on for months and months. And I didn't think of it as a call at that time, but looking back, I can really see that this was my body and my soul really speaking to me and saying, hey, something needs to change here. And so that was the call. And I started to get the message and thought, what is it I really want to do? I checked out all the physical things. Physically, I was okay. So I had a sense that it had something to do with me stepping into maybe different work or more into my purpose. And I decided to go out and try to start coaching. So I tried and failed to start a coaching business. And I would go deeper into the story if I was really telling it, but that is really the first big challenge or trial I faced in this part of my journey, was trying and failing to start this business. And that was super embarrassing and disheartening because I felt this call to go for something that I loved. And this is what many women that we work with are feeling. Some of them are already doing what they love, but there are others who have a dream on their heart, or even if they are doing what they love, they have another bigger dream on their heart and soul. But the fear is, well, what if I fail? What if I go for it and I fail? And I lived that fear. I went for it and I failed. So this was the first big challenge or trial on my journey. And in my case, I went back to my marketing career for another year. The panic attacks continued. And it wasn't until about a year later that I had my true turning point moment, which is when I would say I stepped over the threshold from the world of the known to the unknown. I was living very much in my head at that time, very much in go mode. And there came this time where I went to Costa Rica and my mom and I were there leading a retreat together. We went a couple of days early and she led me through this process that I didn't even know she was leading me through, asking me questions, helping me really relax and unwind in such a way that my vision started to come through. I always say it was like clarity dawned. And I started to see glimpses of the life I really wanted and what I really wanted to do. And so again, not going deeply into that story right now, but this was like a turning point, stepping over the threshold moment where there was no turning back. And I ended up going for coaching in the end. But this time I had a clearer vision and I had support and a believer, which is something that I didn't have before. So that is the beginning of my story, right? That I would normally tell. And then there were other trials and tribulations along the way. The biggest one being, I would say, that I stepped into this work that I loved. I started making money at it. I went through many trials as I was getting that off the ground. But the next big one that a lot of our clients relate to is that even though I stepped into my soul's work and even though I was making good money at it, I was still burning the candle at both ends. I was totally in go mode. I was overworking. And I did that for the first couple of years that I stepped into this business. And that was really hard because there's a saying, wherever you go, there you are. And that's what I experienced was, oh my gosh, I did the thing. I had the courage. I broke through my fears. I went for it. I was successful at it. And yet, I still have these patterns. And so that would be the next part of my story, would be really going into that. How did I break free of that ultimately? What were the lessons I learned? And many, if not most of our clients relate to this part of my journey in the sense that they may be struggling with being stuck in go mode and wanting to learn a way to approach their life and their work from a different place. And I've done that. I've fully done that. I've integrated those lessons. They are a part of who I am. I now have the ability to really dance between go mode and flow mode and to, create in the world and be out there getting stuff done, but also to have a lot of ease, a lot of flow, a lot of what you might call balance. And that's something that most of the women we work with are really longing for. So this is just an example, and I'm not going to go much deeper into my story at this time. There's many aspects I could tell, and it depends on the audience I'm speaking to. It depends on how long I have to tell my story. I could tell a 5-minute version or a 25-minute version or longer. So this is though I want to show you and demonstrate for you that maybe you even heard something in my story just now, or you have before, that you relate to. And so notice how powerful that is when you're like, oh, she gets it. She's gone through something similar. Or, oh, she's done something that I really long to do. So, and notice that because I've really reflected on my story so much, I can lengthen it or I can shorten it, right? There's a 2 to 5-minute version of it, and then there's a 20-minute version, and it never comes out 100% exactly the same, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. It's the essence of it that matters. It's the feeling of it. It's taking people back into your life experience. And no matter if you think it's powerful or not, I promise you, it will conduct, it will, carry energy with it if you use your story in the right way at the right time for the right audience. So don't worry about getting this right now. I'm just giving you examples, and I'm giving you a way to start to think about this, and an example of, a little aspect, a little sliver of my own story. So when it comes to, if you were going to take your story and then write, let's say, an about page or bio for a website, then here's the key. You don't need to tell your whole life story. This is something people get caught up on, right? If I told you the whole story from the time I was a kid and everything we went through and all the trials and tribulations along the way and all the lessons that I learned, it would take a long time. So I'm not going to go into that for most of the time for these purposes. But the version I just told you, that version, some part of that or some version of that, I would definitely tell on an about page to really share, like, these were the key moments. In fact, if you want to go as an example to makenasage.com and go to my about page, I'm pulling it up right now so I can actually look at it. I do this. I tell my story in kind of two main parts. The first part being, and it says it on the side here, about an old belief I held and then a new experience or a new paradigm I stepped into. So that old belief in that first part of my story was I have to choose between making great money and doing work I love. I can't have both. And then the new experience or paradigm I stepped into was when I do work I love, I make even more money and life keeps getting better and better. And that was true in that first part of my journey of stepping into work that I loved and proving to myself that I would make even more money and life would keep getting richer. That was that first part of the story I told you. And then I call it kind of my second rebirth. I went from this old belief of I have to work hard to be successful. And the harder I work, the more successful I'll be, to this new experience of when I create space for what wants to flow through me, life and business feel effortless and everything I desire is magnetized to me. And believe it or not, I became even more successful by, in some ways, taking a step back, not fully back, but by learning to integrate more of the go and the flow. So this is a great example. If you were, writing an about page, you could look at this as an example. I tell my story here in kind of two parts. And then I talk about where am I now, or what changed, and how does that tie into how I support other people. So that's one example of a way that you could write an about page and kind of take this exercise. So you don't need to tell your whole life story, only the parts that are relevant to your ideal client or reader. What will they relate to? And if they don't relate specifically to your story, again, then what are some experiences that show you have shared values and care about similar things? And that should really be about 75% of what you share is relatable in some way. Most people focus too much on their about pages or their bios on credibility. They think, oh, I need to list all of my accolades. I need to list all my accomplishments. And that's only one part of the puzzle. It's so important that people feel they can connect to you, can relate to you, or that you have shared values. I'm doing my out of breath thing again. If you haven't been listening to the podcast lately, I'm often out of breath these days because I am 6.5 months pregnant. Maybe more at the time that this podcast episode airs. So think about your bio or your about page as 75% relatability, about 25 or let's say 20% credibility. So you can share your, achievements and those kinds of things if you want to. And then the last 5% is usually a call to action. Like, what do you want them to do after they read this? They book a call with you, or they, connect with you in some way, or they sign up for a program or check out your programs or whatever that is. So that's a little framework for an about page. And, again, if you were telling your story for social media, then you might just take one little story. I could take the Costa Rica story of my turning point, or I could take the trying and failing to start a business the first time or start a coaching business. Or I could take any real point along the way and I could tell probably many different posts from that one share. Now, these days you can definitely use AI to help you, but I don't want you to go too far into that because otherwise your copy will end up sounding like AI. So if you are going to use this for a speech or a website or social media post, just know that, yes, we can tell if you just use ChatGPT to generate it. So try to really, here are some of my favorite little quick tips on AI is have it ask you questions. So tell it what you want to do. I want to write an about page for my website, or I want to write a version of my story I could tell in a speech, and then tell it how long the speech is going to be and how much of it would be your story. And then say, can you please act as my, speech writing coach? And first ask me questions about my story, ask me questions that will help me write this effectively, and ask me questions that will help us really make sure this is in my voice and my tone and doesn't just sound like AI. And then it will coach you. It will go back and forth with you and ask you a bunch of questions. Or you can give it examples of other people's speeches you've liked, put the link in there and say, watch this speech. I like this kind of framework. Or say, look at these social media posts. I like this person's approach. So get really clear on the voice or the tone you want and take the time to dig deeper. If you're going to use AI, it's interesting. The rare occasion, I do most of my writing myself, but on the rare occasion that I do use AI, because I want to just bring in a little bit of a different element or something like that, I always marvel at how it takes me just as long with AI as it does on my own. But again, it comes out a little differently than it would if I was just writing it myself. And sometimes because I've written for so many years, I transitioned out of copywriting many years ago, but I write all of our copy for our business. And so emails, the show notes for this podcast, like everything, I do all that writing. And I might utilize AI sometimes for ideas, but I always tweak and I always make sure that it's in my voice or it's in our voice as a company, mine and my mom's. And so it's interesting because it takes me just as long. I had this the other day writing some emails. I was like, I always write them kind of the way I write them. And it's actually quite fast for me at this point to write them myself because I have so much practice. But I thought maybe I'd get a little bit of a different lens or a different way of approaching this. And it took me probably longer to write it with AI because we went back and forth on versions. And I said, lay out how you could do it this way or ask me questions, make sure this is in my voice. I've given it lots of examples of my writing. So this back and forth took a while. So I love AI as a time-saving tool, but I like it even more as let's say a brainstorming tool or a way to really help you refine and kind of use it almost like a person coaching you versus just letting it just write whatever it writes. And then it sounds like it was written by AI. So that's just my little soapbox there if you are working on your story, because the story is so personal to you. And so I really want you to, take the time and dig deeper if you are going to share it. So you could do this just as an exercise for you again and go through your life's journey, and it can be very powerful. Or if you're really going to say, okay, how do I go out and apply this? Then again, use AI, but use it, I would say, the right way. Not that there's a right way. You can find your own, but make sure it doesn't sound like that. It sounds like you, because this is your story and your journey. So for business networking, if you're going to tell a version of your story, you definitely don't need to tell your whole story, but you could tell a super short version. If I were at a women's networking event, people could say, well, tell me a little bit about you. And I could say, well, let me tell you a story. I could literally just start that way. Let me tell you a story. 7 years ago, I was in a very successful career. It looked great on paper, but I started feeling this call to something more and I didn't want to listen. And it turned into anxiety and panic attacks. And I could not seem to get clear on what I wanted to do. And ultimately, it really took a guide and a mentor who stepped in and helped me break through and see my bigger vision and then have the courage to pursue it. And that was 7 years ago. And, I stepped into work I loved. It's been amazing. I love helping women step into their bigger visions. And, I could even end it there, or if I had a little more time or wanted to go deeper, I could go into the go mode and flow mode part of things or whatever that is. But notice that was even just as I told it, a very short version of a story. And it's absolutely true. That's a huge piece of what we support our clients to do is like, what is that something more for you? And stepping into that. And it doesn't have to be a business like it was for me. It could be a calling, a legacy, traveling more. It could be whatever that is for you. But for many of our clients, it is a business, or it is a project, or it is their next level of leadership. And so that's an example of how you can tell a very short version of your story at, let's say, a networking event. And notice how that's more powerful than just saying, well, I'm a coach for women, right? And then that kind of closes off the conversation. You start with a story, then people lean in and often want to know more. So this is a very, I would say, fun, but also kind of dense topic today. And we're going to leave it at that and let you play and run with it. And don't take it too seriously. Don't try to get it right. Just reflect, enjoy. You have no idea where this exercise might take you, what might get sparked out of it. So if you have some interesting ahas, please write in and share them with us. You can write to support@wayofthemuse.com. We love hearing from you. We love hearing how you're applying these things. And I think that's it for today. If you know someone in your life who would benefit from this, whether they're an entrepreneur or just someone who, you just thought of when you were listening to this episode, please share it with them. And we'll see you next week. Bye.
That's our episode for today, but let's not make it the end of our love story. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and think of some women in your life you'd love to share it with. And if you want to learn more about our events and programs, visit wayofthemuse.com. See you next time.